So I'll be sharing a presentation on the environmental measures in India in achieving the goals of the sustainable development. And most of it comes from the experience and the active work that we do in the Sustainability Reporting Standard Board. I'm also the chairman of the task force of the SAFA, which is South Asian Federation of Accountants, this task force on the climate change and sustainability. And we also work with the International Federation of Accountants, IFAC, PAFA, which is Pan-African Federation of Accountants, and also with the World Economic Forum. So let me take you through that, what we are into. So recently, this Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change, there is a paper which is issued by the Code Red. It's a Code Red for humanity. And the heat is actually on all of us. And we know that climate change is real and human activities are the main cause. During COVID, the earth was taking a break and the nature was flourishing. All of us were locked inside and the animals and the birds were outside. Why that happened? Because the GHG emission at that point of time has significantly gone down and we are back to the same levels again. The concentration of the GHG gases in the Earth's atmosphere are directly linked to the average global temperature on the Earth. And the concentration has been rising steadily. The mean global temperature along with it since the time of the Industrial Revolution. And of course, CO2, carbon dioxide, comprises 2/3 of the GHG emissions. And methane comprises about 25% of the GHG emissions. Methane is a very powerful pollutant with a global warming potential over 80 times greater than the CO2 during the 20 years after it is released into the atmosphere. Let us look at the global and regional risk for increasing levels of global warming. This is where we were in 1950 to 2000, and now there are 4 possible projections and scenarios. If the temperature rises by 1.9 degree, we will be here. If it goes up to 2.6 degree, we'll be here. It can go up to 4.5 degree, it can go up to 7 degree, it can go up to 8.5 degree. So this is what can happen. So there are reasons for concern. And this has been made by the IPCC Climate Change 2022. So it talks about the various scenarios which can happen if we do not adapt ourselves to the sustainable practices. So if you really look at today, there is a climate hazard, there is exposure, and then there is vulnerability leading to the overall risk. We need to adapt. We need to be on the right side of this graph, from urgent to timely action. The governance needs to be placed, the finances needs to be in place, knowledge and capacity building has to happen, and technology needs to be adopted. What we need to do, we need to have a climate resilient development, which is focusing on human health and well-being, equity and justice. We need to have an ecosystem health and the planetary health. The ecosystem transition should focus on land, freshwater, coastal areas, ocean, ecosystems, and their biodiversity. We need to adapt to mitigate. We need to adapt to mitigate, and the transition has to happen in the human systems as well. There has to be a societal level change. Energy, the way we produce and consume energy, industrial growth, urban, rural, and infrastructure, all these needs to undergo change. We talk of net zero. Let us understand what is net zero. The Science-Based Targets Initiative defines net zero as reducing the scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3 emissions to zero or to a residual level, which is consistent with the overall target of maintaining the climate temperature within 1.5 degree, that is the increase in temperature within 1.5 degree, and neutralizing any residual emissions at the net zero target year, which is 2050. And so the scope is that it should cover all, direct and indirect, that is including the supply chain emissions also. So we call them scopes 1, 2, and 3. The existing standards and the certification are currently being developed by the Science-Based Target Initiative, and it encompasses the whole organization. Net zero, of course, is a long-term goal, and it involves setting specific target to work towards with mandatory short, medium-term targets. And as we said, that we have to achieve the net zero in line with 1.5 degrees Celsius pathway, and the timeline to do that is 2050. India has promised 2070 as of now, but we will see in the times to come, it will be reduced to 2050. Let us see the India's focus on the climate change. There are many decarbonization drivers. Technological innovations are happening, job growths are happening. Net zero targets have been set by 127 countries, and the oil and gas sector is very, very active on this. Energy security is a priority, and there is a lot of CO2 emissions in the oil and gas sector. Of course, there are emissions in the others as well. So if you look at the Paris Agreement, it was adopted by 196 countries, and targets are being revised every 5 years. And the current target is to achieve climate neutrality by 2050. India's target is the commitment that was given by the Prime Minister in COP26, that by 2030, we will reduce our carbon intensity by almost 1/3. And our commitment is to produce 5 million tons of green hydrogen by 2030. You may have noticed that the minister, Mr. Nitin Gadkari, yesterday traveled to the parliament in the hydrogen-propelled vehicle. So there are various schemes of the government: the PAT scheme, the Ujala scheme, Kusum scheme, PLI scheme, the National Solar Mission, Green Hydrogen Policy, and National Policy on Biofuels. So the government is very, very active in this direction. If you look at how people are basically looking at this whole strategy around climate, if I take the international oil and gas measure, Shell, BP, Total, etc. So they are doing a peer assessment, that what their peer sets are doing. They are setting the narrative, redefining the KPI. So KPIs are no more financial targets, which are given to the sales team, marketing team, finance team, etc. Now KPIs are being redefined, and a carbon roadmap is being developed, and GHG accounting is happening. So this will increase the stakeholder confidence. If you really see that today, particularly the international investor and the private equity investor is not willing to invest in a company if it is not sensitive to the environment. Now let's talk about what is sustainability. Sustainability, as defined by the United Nations Brundtland Commission, is meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. So what it indicates, we have to meet our needs without compromising on the future generations. And today, the scenario is that by 15th of August, we are using the annual resources of the earth. So in 7.5 months, we are using 12 months resources, which means that we are borrowing from the next year and borrowing from the next generation. We need to focus on the triple Ps. Earlier, the focus was on profits, and now the focus is on profit, planet, and people. So when we talk of profit, we talk of economic viability. So we talk of strengthening and maintaining the current and future jobs with sufficient incentives, both to employer and the employee. Compliance, governance, and risk management. Then we talk about research and development, innovation, technology upgradation, and we talk of a circular economy. That is the whole economy of production to consumption. The whole economy of production to consumption has to be sustainable. The whole chain from this production to consumption has to be sustainable. Now, if we talk about planet, we should focus on the natural resource integrity and protection, reducing our environment footprint, and doing a waste management. Waste management is very, very important. If you look at the landfill, if you look at the landfill in Delhi, two landfill account for 180 lakh ton of waste, and more than 60 to 70 lakh ton of waste is generated every year. And then of course every decision has to be an environment friendly decision. Uh, Around the people, if we talk about, we have to ensure the local communities protection, the human health and safety, employee welfare, and resource security. And then we have to build training capacity and capacity building. So we need to focus on economic viability, environment protection, and the social equity. I hope my screen is visible and it is changing.
Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. So now let's talk of these 17 Sustainable Development Goals, which the United Nations has given in 2015. We'll talk about each goal. This is a whole matrix of the 17 SDGs. And these SDGs are cross-cutting and multidimensional. They focus on the E, S, and G. So when we talk about social, SDG 1 to 6 focus on social: no poverty, zero hunger, good health and well-being, quality education, gender equality, and clean water and sanitation. On the economic goals, SDG 7 and 11 focuses on affordable and clean energy, decent work and economic growth, industry innovation and infrastructure, reducing inequalities, sustainable cities, and the communities. On the environmental side, we focus on the, just a minute. Yeah, on the environment side, the SDG 12 to 15 covers sustainable consumption and production, climate action, life below water, life on land. And SDG 16 and 17 talk about fostering peace and partnership in the form of peace, justice, and strong institutions, and partnerships for the goals. Let us talk about SDG 1. SDG 1 focuses on poverty. The goal is to end poverty in all its forms everywhere. And we know that COVID-19 has led to a first rise in extreme poverty in a generation. Why? Because the poor had no means to earn their living. The global poverty rate is projected to be 7% in 2030. 7% in today's scenario is very, very high. And the working poverty, that is those people who are working and still they are in poverty, that disproportionately affects women and youth, and the pandemic is likely to magnify those disparities. And eradication of poverty should not be seen as a task of charity. It should be seen as an act of justice and the key to unlocking an enormous human potential. The target on SDG 1 is that by 2030, eradicate extreme poverty for all people everywhere. And that's measured as people living on less than $1.25 a day. They are being treated as extreme poverty. And by 2030, reduce at least by half the proportion of men, women, and children of all ages living in poverty in all its dimensions, according to the national definition. So here, a leeway has been given to each country to define it and implement nationally appropriate social protection system and measures for all, including floors, and by 2030, achieve substantial coverage of the poor and the vulnerable. Let's now talk about SDG 2, which is zero hunger. The goal is to end hunger, achieve food security, and improve nutrition, and promote sustainable agriculture. Today, there are about 720 to 800 million people who are undernourished. And surprisingly, this number has increased over a period of time. With economic development, you would expect this number to go down, how it has gone up. And there are 2.37 billion people. That's 237 crore people, which is almost 1/3 of the total population of the globe. They are without food or unable to eat a healthy, balanced diet on a regular basis. So the target on SDG 2 is by 2030, end hunger and ensure access by all people, in particular the poor and people in the vulnerable situation and infants, to safe, nutritious, and sufficient food all year round. And by 2030, end all form of malnutrition, including by 2025, the internationally agreed targets on stunting and wasting in children under 5 years of age. SDG 3 talks about good health and well-being. And here the target is to ensure healthy lives and promote well-being for all at all ages. Uh, Currently, there are at least 400 million people who have no basic health care, and 40% of them lack the social protection. And more than 1.6 billion people live in the fragile settings with protracted crisis. And even today, more than 15 million people are still waiting for HIV treatment, even though 21.7 million people are receiving HIV treatment, but still 15 million do not receive it. Every 2 seconds, someone aged 30 to 70 years dies prematurely from the non-communicable diseases. For example, the cardiovascular diseases, chronic respiratory diseases, diabetic, or cancer. And more than one of every 3 women have experienced either physical or sexual violence, resulting in both short-term and long-term consequences. And 7 million people die every year from exposure to the fine particles in polluted air. The target of SDG 3 is to reduce the global maternal mortality ratio, MMR, to less than 70 per 1 lakh live births. And by 2030, end preventable deaths of newborn and children under 5 years of age, with all countries aiming to reduce the neonatal mortality to at least as low as 12 per 1,000 live birth, and under 5 mortality to at least as low as 25 per 1,000 live births. SDG 4 focuses on quality education. And here the target is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. So basically, the idea is to help countries in mobilizing resources and implementing innovative and context-appropriate solutions, seek equitable solutions and universal access, and facilitate the return of students to school when they reopen to avoid an upsurge in the dropout rates. And this is very important during this COVID era. So the target of 2030 for SDG 4 is to ensure that all girls and boys complete free, equitable, and quality primary and secondary education. And all girls and boys have access to quality early childhood development, care, and pre-primary education so that they are ready for the primary education. SDG 5 talks about gender equality, and the target is to achieve gender equality and empower women and girls. And of course, we all understand that why it is vital for development. You can't afford to have 50% of your population not contributing or not being measured, and that will happen only when gender equality is ensured. So the idea is to end all forms of discrimination against all women and girls everywhere, and eliminate all form of violence against all women and girls in public and private spheres. And very interestingly, the target is also to recognize and value the unpaid care which women and girls render at homes. Unpaid care and domestic work, that should also be valued. And also ensuring women participation and leadership in decision making. SDG 6 talks about clean water and sanitation. The objective here is to ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. Every year, we know that millions of people, mainly children, die from the diseases associated with water. And it's estimated that by 2050, at this rate, more than half of the world population will live in water-stressed regions. This is as per this research done by MIT. And every day, over 700 children under age 5 die from diarrhea linked to unsafe water, sanitation, and poor hygiene. So the water scarcity affects more than 40% of the global population, and countries are really finding it very challenging. The target of SDG 6 by 2030 is to achieve universal and equitable access to safe and affordable drinking water for all, and to achieve access to adequate and equitable sanitation and hygiene for all, and end open defecation, paying special attention to the needs of women and girls and those in vulnerable situations, and also improve water quality by reducing the pollution, eliminating dumping, and minimizing the release of hazardous chemicals and materials. SDG 7 is on affordable and clean energy. Here, the objective is to ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. Today, if you really see, and these numbers are shocking, 1/3 of the world's population use dangerous and inefficient cooking system. So 2.6 billion people, and 759 million people do not have access to electricity. Of course, 75% of them live in the sub-Saharan Africa. Energy efficiency is the key, and we need to improve the energy efficiency rate. The annual efficiency improvement rate has been 2% from 2000 to 2018, but what we need is 3% from 2018 to 2030. And the action has to be accelerated on the modern renewable energy, especially in the heating and the transport sector. Today in the electricity sector, this renewable share is 25%, which is good. But in the heating sector, it's only 9%, and transport sector, it's even low at 3.4%. The target of SDG 7 is to ensure universal access to affordable, reliable, and modern energy services, and increase substantially the share of renewable energy in the global energy mix, and double the global rate of improvement in the energy efficiency. SDG 8 focuses on decent work and economic growth, and our target of promoting the sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth, full and productive employment, and decent work for all. So basically, the focus is on employment and sustained, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth. The target under SDG is to sustain the per capita economic growth in accordance with the national circumstances. So each country will decide, but at least a 7% GDP growth in the least developed countries, and achieve higher level of economic productivity through diversification, technological upgrading, and innovation, including through a focus on high value added and labor intensive sectors. SDG 9 is on industry, innovation, and infrastructure. And here the target is to build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and foster innovation. And of course, the target is twofold: to basically do the infrastructure development, increasing the efficiency, access to finance, information technology, and research for industries, and inclusive industrialization by focusing on the developing and least developed countries, island nations, and also the landlocked nations. Like Bhutan is a landlocked nation. SDG 9 is industry, innovation, and infrastructure. The targets in this SDG 9 are developing quality, reliable, sustainable, and resilient infrastructure, including regional and trans-border infrastructure, to support economic development and human well-being, with a focus on affordable and equitable access for all, and to promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization, and by 2030, significantly raising the industry share of employment and GDP in line with national circumstances, and doubling the share in the least developed countries. Let's talk about SDG 10 now. It talks about reducing the inequalities. Inequalities of income, inequalities of wealth, inequalities in how we treat people, inequalities in how we treat people based on race and the ethnicity. Reducing inequality would mean ensuring equal opportunity and reducing inequalities of outcome, including by eliminating discriminatory laws, policies, and practices, and promoting appropriate legislation, policies, and actions. The target under SDG 10 are progressively achieve and sustain income growth of bottom 40% of the population. That is, those who are in bottom 40% at a rate which is higher than the national rate. So that will help reduce the inequality. That's the gap between the lowest and the highest. And empower and promote the social, economic, and political inclusion of all, irrespective of age, sex, disability, race, ethnicity, origin, religion, or economic or other status. And adopt policies, especially fiscal, wage, and social protection policies, and progressively achieve greater equality. SDG 11 is on sustainable cities and the communities. And the target is to make the cities and human settlement inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Today, 50% of us live in the cities, and is expected to grow by more than 70% by 2050. And this growth will occur in the developing world. 95% of the urban expansion in the next 4 decades will take place in the developing world, and Asia and Africa will contribute 86% to it. Over the next 4 decades, the urban population in Asia is likely to increase from 1.9 billion to 3.3 billion. And even today, 700 people live in slums. Can you imagine that cities occupy only 3% of the land, but account for 60 to 80% of energy consumption, 75% of the GHG emissions, 80% of the global GDP, and consume 70% of all resources, and also generates 70% of global waste? If you can really do an equitable distribution and move from cities to rural areas and develop the rural areas, that can ease the pressure on the cities. So there's a pressure on the freshwater supplies, sewage, the living environment, and public health in the cities. And the coastal cities are under severe pressure due to climate-related disasters such as floods, storms, and the rising sea levels. The target under SDG 11 is to ensure access for all to adequate, safe, and affordable housing and basic services and upgrade slums, and to ensure the sustainable transport system for all, improving road safety, and the special attention to the needs of vulnerable sections. SDG 12 is on responsible consumption and production. And at least as consumers, all of us can help, maintaining a fine balance. The target here is to ensure sustainable consumption and production patterns. Can we believe that in just 17 years, the global material footprint has increased by 70%? 1 million plastic drinking bottles are purchased every minute. This is not every day. This is every minute. 1 million plastic drinking bottles are purchased. 5 trillion single-use plastic bags are thrown away each year. And each person generates 7.3 kg of e-waste, mobile phones, laptops, desktops, and other things. And only 1.7 kg is recycled out of this 7.3 kgs. So what is required under SDG 12 is to implement the 10-year framework of programs on sustainable consumption and production, and achieve the sustainable management and efficient use of natural resources, and substantially reduce waste generation through prevention, reduction, recycling, and reuse. SDG 13 is where the maximum focus is there, which is climate action. And it's urgent. We need to take urgent action to combat climate change and its impact. Otherwise, if we don't do it, then the temperature of the earth likely to increase by 3 degrees Celsius by the end of this century. India contributes 7% of the global GHG emissions, and we have committed to reduce our carbon intensity by 33 to 35%. We need to strengthen the resilience and adaptive capacity to climate-related hazards and natural disaster in all countries, and integrate climate change measures into national policies, strategies, and planning. SDG 14 is on life below water. Normally, our focus doesn't go to the marine life, but we need to conserve and sustainably use the oceans, seas, and marine resources for sustainable development. There's a loss of USD 50 billion due to impact on the life below oceans. And over 3 billion people, that is more than 40% people, depend on marine and coastal biodiversity for their livelihoods. The global market value of marine and coastal resources and industries is estimated at 3 trillion USD per year, which is close to 5% of the global GDP. And still 95% of the ocean still remains unexplored. Unmonitored fishing is something that needs to be checked, and the awareness among all of us on the impact on life below water is still low. 21% of all species of fish are deemed at risk of extinction across the globe, and 40% of the world oceans are heavily affected by the human activities. The target is by 2025, prevent and significantly reduce marine pollution of all kinds, in particular from land-based activities, including the marine debris and nutrient pollution. And by 2030, sustainably manage and protect marine and coastal ecosystems to avoid significant adverse impacts, including by strengthening their resilience and take action for their restoration in order to achieve healthy and productive oceans. SDG 15 talks about life on land where all of us live. And the target is to protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystem, sustainably manage forests, combat the desertification, and halt and reverse land degradation, and halt the biodiversity loss. Today, the loss of species is 100 to 1,000 times faster than their natural extinction rates. And whereas the 70% of the world's poor live in rural areas and depend directly on the biological diversity for their livelihoods. Today, we are pursuing economic growth at the expense of the natural environment, and general awareness level is low. 7.3 million hectares of land, which is equivalent to one country like Panama, is lost every year. And 15% of the GHG emission come from the deforestation. Look at the kind of deforestation which is happening across the globe. So the target of 2030 is to combat desertification, restore degraded land and soil, including land affected by desertification, drought and floods, and strive to achieve a land degradation neutral world. We must ensure the conservation of mountain ecosystems, the way the glaciers are melting, the way the temperature at the Antarctica is rising, that's becoming a tourism hub. Maybe 2-3 decades ago, nobody could have thought of going to Antarctica. We need to promote fair and equitable sharing of the benefits arising from the utilization of genetic resources and promote appropriate access to such resources. SDG 6 talks about the peace, justice, and strong institutions. The target is to promote peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, and inclusive institutions at all levels. The target is to significantly reduce all form of violence and related death rates elsewhere, everywhere, and abuse, exploitation, trafficking, and all form of violence against and torture of children, and promote the rule of law, and significantly reduce the illicit financial and arms flow, strengthen the recovery and return of stolen assets, and combat all forms of organized crime. SDG 17 is on partnerships for the goals. We have to strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. So this will stitch together all the 16 goals. And basically, Now, let us talk about, we have talked about what these SDGs are. Now, let's talk about what is sustainability reporting. Sustainability reporting is the practice of measuring, disclosing, and being accountable to internal and external stakeholders for organizational performance against specific environmental, social, and governance goals in matrices that support sustainable development and for how it's incorporated into a company's overall strategies and policies. So it talks about the financial value, consumer value, human value, and societal values, and why it is required. It's required because an organization need to consider the impact of their action across the ecosystem. For example, if a soft drink manufacturing company is using water, so then if water is priced at say 100 rupees per 1,000 liters, they can't say, yeah, since we have paid for the water, so our work is over. No. Can they really replenish 100 liters of water in the nature at 1,000 rupees? We need to think about the opportunity cost of the resources that we are using. We need to ensure that the performance of an organization takes into account environment, sustainability, health and safety, and human resources. So when we talk about ESG, we talk about sustainability. The three components of ESG, E comprises climate change, ecological impacts, energy management, GHG emissions, litigation risk, for example, related to environmental contamination, policies and regulations, raw material sourcing from the sustainable vendors, renewable energy, sustainable products and packaging, water and waste management. S stands for community relations. The social comprises of community relations, diversity, equity and inclusion, employee health and safety, human capital development, labor management, privacy and data security, product quality and safety, supply chain standards. And G stands for anti-bribery and anti-corruption, business ethics, corporate resiliency, diversity of leadership, executive compensation, lobbying and political contributions, ownership structure, and tax transparency. There are before 2010, only GRI framework was there, but between 2010 to 2020, we have GRI, BRR, CDP, IIRC, and TCFD. And now, of course, many more frameworks are emerging. World Economic Forum has given a stakeholder capitalism matrices. It focuses on governance, planet, people, and prosperity. So it focuses basically on these four areas. Under governance, they talk about the purpose, the composition of the governing body, material issues impacting the stakeholders, anti-corruption, protected ethics, advice and reporting mechanism, integrating risk and opportunity into business processes. Under planet, GHG, TCFD implementation, land use and ecological sensitivity, and water consumption and withdrawal in water-stressed areas. When they talk about people, they talk about percentage, diversity and inclusion, percentage in pay equality, percentage wage level increase, risk for incidents of child force or compulsory labor, percentage people having access to health and safety, and training provided. Prosperity, when it is talked about, they talk about absolute number and rate of employment, economic contribution, financial investment contribution, total R&D expenditure, and the total taxes paid. Now, what's coming globally? Globally, we are coming with Climate Standard Board, TCFD. We have the International Sustainability Standard Board, which also has issued the exposure draft to its general principle standard this morning. In the Indian scenario, we had the voluntary guidance on the CSR, which was issued by MC in 2009, and then came the NVG national voluntary guidelines in 2011. In 2013, the non-financial information disclosure became mandatory, and then the MCA constituted a committee on BRR, business responsibility reporting, and in 2019, SEBI extended the BRR requirement to top 1,000 listed companies by market cap, and now from next year, the BRR is being replaced by BRSR, and from next year, it will be mandatory for top 1,000 listed companies. ICI has constituted a sustainability reporting standard board, of which I am the chairman. And the objective has been to develop the sustainability reporting framework in India, leading the adoption of sustainability reporting by corporates, collaborating with regulators and government agencies, nurturing skills of chartered accountants in sustainability reporting and assurance, and recognizing excellence in sustainability reporting. We are focusing on technical literature, capacity building, advocacy, and the regulatory interaction. On the technical literature, we have issued a standard on the assurance engagements, on the greenhouse gas emissions, and the background material on the BRSR, business responsibility and sustainability reporting. We also have a publication on SDG, Accountants Creating Sustainable World, in 3 volumes, and a benchmarking model on sustainability reporting maturity model, which is built around the BRSR and the first of its kind across the globe. So this sustainability reporting maturity model basically puts the whole evaluation of BRSR into 4 categories. Level 1 is a formative stage. Level 2 is an emerging stage. Level 3 is an established stage. And level 4 is leading by example. For capacity building, we have done 9 batches of our 5-day certificate course, wherein more than 700 members have been trained. And we have organized 12 national and global webinars in which more than 17,000 members have participated, and also developed a film on the board and its activities, and also organize a carbon footprint challenge. On the advocacy side, we are working with almost all the regulators across the globe, whether it's IFAC, IIRC, GRI, PAFA, ISSB, UNCAC, SAFA, World Economic Forum, SEBI, Niti Aayog, etc. And now we are working with the Security Exchange Board of India on developing the framework for the social stock exchange. We also instituted Sustainability Reporting Awards last year, and these are both national as well as international awards to encourage companies and organizations to adopt sustainable reporting practices. We are focusing on research. We have instituted 4 research grants on the sustainability related areas like the green finance, circular economy, and then we are focusing on organizing workshops on board's role in the ESG. We are also coming out with an ESG talk show, helping the government in developing social audit standards for the social stock exchange. And we are also working on the ESG ratings and on the ESG data repository. So this is all about my presentation, and where we are today, and what we are doing in this space from the Institute of Chartered Accountant of India.